His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki, Grantha Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Gaura Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Radha Damodar, when people want to join, can you let them in? Okay. Or does it have to be done from this computer? No. You can do it. Okay, because someone I saw. Okay. For those of you that are not familiar with this section of Bhagavatam, little background. What you see on the screen, hopefully you can see on your screen, is Uddhava before Krishna, who's reclining with his back to a young banyan tree with his four-armed form, Vasudeva Krishna. And behind Uddhava is Maitreya. Well, it's a beautiful painting, but this scene that you see on the screen happens later. There's a chronology where after Uddhava Gita, many things happen, including Krishna sending Uddhava to go to Badrikashram to carry his message and association, Krishna's association through his representative Uddhava, to the ashram of Narayan. He doesn't make it. He's feeling intense separation from Krishna. He doubles back. And he comes, as you see in this painting, by the side of the river Saraswati. And that's where Maitreya comes, as you see behind Uddhava, where he hears yet another discussion. which isn't the same as Uddhava Gita. But it's a beautiful painting. Where Uddhava Gita takes place is in Dwarka, and Uddhava has a very clear intuition that Krishna is going to depart. His pastimes are over, and he's unable to bear that thought. He goes to Krishna, throws himself at Krishna's feet, makes two basic appeals. One is, take me with you. The other is, how please explain to me how a person like me, who is so attached to family, etc., can know you properly and fully and perfectly. So that question is the prompt for the next 3 chapters. That was in chapter 6. So now we're in chapter 9, 7, 8, we covered. Krishna begins describing jnana vairagya, knowledge and detachment. To assist, to remove the obstacle of attachment so that the path of bhakti is wide open and clear. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojataha Janiyatiyashu Vairagyam Jnanam Cha Yadhaitukam. The bhakti itself is sufficient for awakening jnana and vairagya. At the same time, there is a step in the bhakti process where one will hear, like Uddhava is doing here, he's hearing from Krishna about knowledge and detachment, or jnana mishra bhakti, one could say. So, a major part of this section is now concluded, and there's some remaining part. Krishna tells Uddhava a story, and the story is King Yadu, the ancestor, previous Yadu king, King Yadu, is both Uddhava and Krishna in the line of Yadu. Yadu came across an Avadhuta Brahmana and was very surprised to see what he saw and started asking questions of the Avadhuta Brahmana. How did you become so elevated and detached, etc., etc.? So the Avadhuta Brahmana says, I achieved what I've achieved by the mercy of 24 gurus. Go ahead. 24 gurus. That's a lot of gurus. And they're shiksha personalities, but the gurus are not necessarily. Is it okay? Okay. The gurus are not necessarily people, because there's, among the 24 includes the sun and the wind and the earth and mountains and birds and, so many of the 24. And he learns so many things from so many gurus. The last one that we completed is chapter 8, is titled after a prostitute named Pingala, and we heard all that description. She became detached, and more than detached, she became totally sold out, surrendered devotee to the personality of Godhead, kind of really quickly, suddenly, abruptly. And then she expresses many devotional teachings. So it's knowledge and detachment leading to bhakti. So that's where chapter 8 ended. What I'm going to do now is read the chapter summary. That's both the BBT version and Bhaktisiddhanta's version. Bhaktisiddhanta wrote a very elaborate commentary on the whole Uddhava Gita, and we'll hear both. And then we'll start with verse 1. So the BBT commentary, this is not Prabhupada, this is his followers. And if you know Hridayananda Maharaj, you'll recognize the language. It's Vidayananda Maharaj's fingerprints all over the place. The Avadhuta Brahmana describes his 7 remaining gurus. So 24 minus 7, that's how many have been covered already. And 7 are in this chapter. Beginning with a kurara bird. That's kurara is a type of hawk. He also describes an additional guru, one's own body. The instruction received from the kurara bird is that attachment creates misery, but the person who is unattached and has no material possessions is qualified to achieve unlimited happiness. The Avadhuta Brahmana learned from the foolish, lazy child that by becoming free from anxiety, a person becomes capable of worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead and experiencing supreme ecstasy. That's 2 of the remaining 7. Third, the instruction received from the young girl who kept just 1 conch shell bracelet on each wrist is that one should remain alone and thus steady one's mind. Then only will it be possible for one to fix one's mind completely on the personality of Godhead. Once, several men arrived to ask for the hand of the young girl whose relatives had coincidentally left the house. She went inside and began to prepare food for the unexpected guests by beating rice. At that time, her conch shell bracelets were making a loud noise, rattling against each other. In order to stop this sound, she broke off the bracelets one by one until at last only one remained on each arm. Just as 2 or more bracelets make noise, if even 2 people reside in the same place, what to speak of many, there is every chance of mutual quarrel and useless gossip. Amen. Especially Kali Yuga. So that's 3. There's 4 more remaining. The Avadhuta Brahman also received instruction from the arrow maker, who was so absorbed in constructing an arrow that he did not even notice that the king was passing right by him on the road. In the same way, one must strictly control one's mind, concentrating it in the worship of Sri Hari. The Avadhuta Brahmana learned from the serpent that a sage should wander alone, should not live in any prearranged place, should always be careful and grave, should not reveal his movements, should take assistance from no one, and should speak little. The instruction obtained from the spider, who spins his web from his mouth and then withdraws it, is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead similarly creates from out of himself the whole universe and then winds it up into himself. From the weak insect, who assumed the same form as a Peshakrit wasp, Peshakrit wasp, the Avadhuta Brahmana learned that the living entity under the sway of affection, hatred, or fear attains in his next life the identity that of that object upon which he fixes his intelligence. Seeing the fragile material body is subject to birth and death, one who is sober should become devoid of material attachment to this body and should properly utilize the rare gift of human life in pursuit of knowledge, endeavoring always for the achievement of the highest goal. So that was the BBT summary of the chapter. And the language is different and it's interesting, so we'll hear it again. It's Bhaktisiddhanta's chapter summary. In this chapter, the Avadhuta Brahmana describes the lessons to be learned from the 7 remaining spiritual masters, beginning with the Ku-ra-ra bird. He also describes an additional guru, one's own body. Number 1, the instruction of the Ku-ra-ra bird is that attachment is the mother of all distress. One who is unattached has no material possessions is qualified to achieve unlimited happiness. I think we should qualify. No material possessions doesn't mean you're like a monkey living in the jungle and you run around naked and you're Nagababa or something. It means, like Queen Kunti speaks, a kinchana. You are using things but not attached to those things and considering things to be mine. That's what it means. 2, the Avadhuta Brahmana learned from the foolish lazy boy that by becoming free from anxiety, one can nicely worship the Supreme Lord and experience transcendental bliss. So 3 out of 7. The instruction received from the young girl who kept only one conch shell bangle on each wrist is that one should remain alone and thus steady his mind. Only in such a condition will it be possible for one to fix his mind completely on the Supreme Lord. Once, several men arrived to ask for the hand of a young girl whose relatives had coincidentally left the house. She went inside and began to prepare food for the unexpected guests by beating rice paddy. At that time, her conch shell bangles made a loud noise rattling against each other. In order to stop this sound, the girl broke off the bangles one by one until at last only one remained on each arm. Just as 2 or more bangles make noise, if 2 or more people live together, there is bound to be quarrel and useless gossiping. So that's 3 of 7. So here's number 4. The Avadhuta Brahmana also received instruction from the arrow maker, who was so absorbed in constructing an arrow that he did not even notice that the king was passing right by him on the road. In the same way, one should worship Sri Hari with undivided attention and a controlled mind. 5. The lesson to be learned from the serpent is that a sage should wander alone, should not live in any prearranged place, should be always careful and grave, should not reveal his movements, should take assistance from no one, and should speak very little. That almost the BBT translators pretty much copied or cut and pasted from Bhaktisiddhanta, which is quite fine. Number 6, this is the lesson to be learned from the spider. Just as a spider makes its web from its own saliva and then withdraws it, the Supreme Lord creates this universe from out of himself and then winds it up into his own body. 7, from the weak insect that assumed the form of a wasp, the Avadhuta Brahmana learned that the living entity, under the sway of affection, hatred, and fear, attains in his next life the identity of that object upon which he has fixed his attention. And then there's 8, which is more than 7. Realizing that the temporary material body is subject to birth and death, and that this human form of body is extremely rarely achieved, so a person should give up his attachment for the body and should properly utilize his time for acquiring knowledge so that he can attain the goal of life. So that's the chapter summary, and it gives you a picture of, if you haven't attended the earlier sections, how this works. An Avadhuta Brahmana is one who is oblivious to or not paying attention to social custom. It doesn't mean that they're a misfit. It just means that they're not under those kinds of considerations or regulations. And obviously we don't imitate such people. But there is a degree of detachment that's extreme. I mean, the transcendental nature of the gopis, in contrast, is they were so attached to Krishna, they also neglected social custom and shyness and modesty and obedience to their husband and their family members. And they were, in that sense, then also avadutas. Now, they lived by social custom for sure. So they weren't this kind of avaduta, but the generic avaduta is not necessarily profoundly attached to Krishna like the gopis, but profoundly detached from social convention. And that to sustain such detachment, it's not just a mad person, but attached to something else. Detached from this means attached to that. So attached is to the sense of the self as eternal, or attached to Sat. And so attached to Sat in a more matured stage is attached to Krishna, Param Satyam. But it's preliminary because the question, look at the screen again, the question being asked by Uddhava to Krishna is how to become free from attachment to family and all of other forms of the temporary, I and mine. How to go to the Brahmabhuta stage, knowledge and detachment, nasochati, nakangsati, how to reach that stage. So these gurus are ones that have taught the Avadhuta Brahmana this knowledge and detachment principle. He's learned from them. So far, the only guru mentioned that speaks specifically about the personality of Godhead is Pingala. So she gets like a lot of attention, a whole lot of verses about Pingala. She's a very special teacher. So we're going to discuss, read verse 1 from this chapter 9. So the speaker is the Avadhuta Brahmana, and the Avadhuta Brahmana is speaking to King Yadu, and Krishna is narrating to Uddhava this conversation. The saintly Brahmana said, everyone considers certain things within the material world to be most dear to him, and because of attachment to such things, one eventually becomes miserable. One who understands this gives up material possessiveness, important, not the possessions themselves, but the possessiveness, and attachment, and thus achieves unlimited happiness. Parigraha is attachment to possession or possessiveness. Bhaktisiddhanta's purport, because apparently there's no BBT purport for this first one. As a result of forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord, the conditioned soul's taste for objects produced by the material modes of passion and ignorance increases unlimitedly. The conditioned souls rarely have the inclination to attain the platform of pure goodness from which one can realize the Supreme Lord. All material miseries are produced from the influence of the modes of passion and ignorance. The momentary lack of distress experienced due to the influence of the mode of goodness, not the same as genuine spiritual happiness. Unalloyed devotees do not notice the presence of temporary distress produced by the interaction of the modes of nature because they experience unlimited happiness due to being situated on the platform of pure goodness. Conditioned souls who are under the control of their senses run after limited, ever-changing, and tempting material objects and thus become beggars to achieve their objectives. This is the cause of their distress. So one of the topics that we've covered a few times in the course of these first two chapters, because it's on the topic of knowledge and detachment, is suffering is not just due to desire, suffering is due to ignorance. Ignorance influences desire to be ignorant desire, and ignorant desire leads to ignorant activity, leads to suffering. So the antidote to suffering is not stop desire, because you can't, but it's replace ignorance with knowledge. So that's what's going on 3 chapters worth. Knowledge of the temporary. And when knowledge of the temporary is understood, what does it leave? You take away ignorance, and what's left? And what's left is the natural awakened state of the soul, knowledge state of the soul. And knowledge of what? Knowledge of Sat. Now, here, there's not emphasis on the supreme Sat, but just Sat, the permanent. Another point I want to touch on that's in this first sentence, I'll read it again. As a result of forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord, the conditioned soul's taste for objects produced by the material modes of passion and ignorance increases unlimitedly. So we also discussed this point. So here we go, I'll do it again. It's according to Bhagavad Gita, the cause of implication in material existence is the twofold raga and dvesha. Dvesha means opposed to, or having animosity towards, or having ill regard for the Supreme. Envy, disregard, the negative feelings toward dvesha. There's another understanding that is discussed by Baladev Vidyabhusan, where he uses a softer word, but it amounts to the same. And that's indifference. This is repeating a topic from earlier. But this indifference sounds like what this Bhaktisiddhanta is writing here. As a result of forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord. For forgetfulness is not necessarily, hey, I've got an attitude. It's just checking out, or complacency. Rather than intensity of absorption, it's indifference, forgetfulness. And so that means the faculty of attentiveness, or chaita, goes away. And there's a state where it's described like this. It's kind of in this zone that's neither attracted to the material or attracted to the spiritual. It's checked out. Complacency, forgetfulness, negligence. When that space is entered into, that's where the allure of material enjoyment creeps in. And so, in our practice, the practical application of that for us is, the experience of rising and falling, or hills and valleys, or the sine curve of unsteadiness, where someone goes up, 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 like with one of the questions, hearing these topics about Ramayana or hearing topics about Krishna. My experience is it's lovely. And then something else happens. Back down again. So how to stay in that higher position? So it's indifference. You check the indifference tendency and assert consciously the submission tendency. And it's our natural position. It's who we are. We're servants of Krishna. So we act in the position of servants of Krishna. We don't become forgetful of Krishna. What's the alternative of being forgetful of Krishna, or the back down again? Is you're attentive to your relationship with Krishna. The same chaita, or consciousness directed towards Krishna in a mood of service or submission or wanting to please. It's totally natural, and the other is our diseased, unnatural condition. So this indifference or forgetfulness or complacency, beware. Whenever that comes, you know what's next. The way that Prabhupada said this, I remember very clearly in the Henry Street Temple he was visiting, and he made this point. It's a strong point still with me, so many years ago. If you turn your attention away from Krishna, this forgetfulness or this indifference or the complacency, you turn your attention away from Krishna, you don't have to invite Maya. Immediately she's there. He gave the example, if you're facing the sun and you turn your face away from the sun, now it's your back to the sun, what happens? You have to say, okay, darkness, you can come now, it's okay. Immediately it's darkness. The Maya comes immediately. So with this sentence, the conditioned soul's taste for objects produced by the material modes of passion and ignorance. That's where it enters. Negligence, different words. Some are stronger, some are milder. I like the word indifference. It's a word that Baladev uses in his Bhagavad Gita commentary. Indifference. Not like you got an attitude, but you just checked out. You're looking around. Bam, here comes the influence of whatever your conditioned tendencies are, whatever your favorite sense objects are, that's what comes into the mind, and off the mind goes in enjoying mood. It's a conditioned state, like this question someone was asking, or comment. When I'm hearing, it's like delightful, and then when the hearing is over, it's back down again. And we all know what that. If we're vigilant, we know what that routine is. So how to get beyond the conditioning, those tendencies? Well, you can try this technique and that technique and so forth. Be more determined and become a stoic and something. But it really is dependent upon bhakti. It's dependent upon becoming attracted to the alternative. So this knowledge and detachment is incomplete without attachment to Krishna. Here is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary summarized by Bhaktisiddhanta. This chapter describes 7 spiritual masters, beginning with the Ku Rara bird. The material body has been added as the eighth spiritual master in this chapter. In total, the lessons to be learned from 25 spiritual masters are described. The first two verses of this chapter deal with the lesson to be learned from the Ku-Rara bird. When one enjoys the object that is most dear to him, he will certainly face great distress later on. On the other hand, those who remain aloof from such attachment, remaining as a kinchana, are to be known as learned men who are qualified to achieve unlimited happiness. I mean, exactly this teaching is in Kunti's prayers, and it's in other places too, but even the language of kinchana and unlimited happiness and so on. So this is just drilling down on that understanding. And here's Vishwanath's actual commentary. The Brahmana said, because of attachment to things considered most dear, one becomes miserable. One who gives up material desires, is learned and achieves unlimited happiness. It's the nature of Bhagavad Gita message. You become attached to the temporary and you suffer. Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate. It's just same message in Bhagavad Gita now being spoken by Krishna to Uddhava. But it's in the form of a Ku-Rara bird. From the Ku-Rara bird he learned this lesson. In the 9th chapter, 7 gurus are described, starting with the Ku-Rara bird, as well as the body, the 8th guru. This makes a total of 25 gurus. He explains what he learned from the Ku-Rara bird in 2 verses. From attachment to what is most dear, one suffers. He who is without desire, material desire, is learned and attains unlimited happiness. Well, I'm going to read the next one too because it's really short and that ends that section. So it's text 2. Once a group of large hawks who were unable to find any prey attacked another weaker hawk who was holding some meat. At that time, being in danger of his life, the hawk gave up his meat and experienced actual happiness. BBT purport. Incited by the modes of nature, birds become violent and kill other birds to eat them or to steal meat captured by them. Hawks, vultures, and eagles are in this category. However, one should give up the envious propensity to commit violence against others and should take to Krishna consciousness, whereby one sees every living entity as equal to oneself. On this platform of actual happiness, one does not envy anyone and thus sees no one as his enemy. The word sami sham in this verse refers to a meat-eating Ku-Rara bird. When a Ku-Rara bird was chased by another stronger Ku-Rara bird, it dropped the flesh in its claws and thus achieved happiness. And Vishwanath's commentary is really short. The Ku-Rara was holding some meat. That's it for this morning's verses, verse 1 and 2, plus the chapter summary. Now, for those of you that are able to see the screen, we're going to go to some very nice illustration that was created by Shruti Mangara. I hope you can see the screen. The saintly Brahmana said, everyone considers certain things within the material world to be most dear to him. And because of attachment to such things, one eventually becomes miserable. One who understands this gives up material possessiveness and attachment and thus achieves unlimited happiness. Fantastic image, huh? She's very, what to speak of the back, she's really good. So the whole of the plan is she's going to go through the whole of Uddhava Gita. I'm sure learn a lot by doing so and make these nice kind of illustrations. Here's the next one. A traditional, I guess, Chinese painting of landscape, and you see some people down there at the bottom. And over at the right, there's the Pu Rara bird. One at the bottom has some meat, and the one at the top is going to attack. Once, a group of large hawks who were unable to find any prey attacked another weaker hawk who was holding some meat. At that time, being in danger of his life, the hawk gave up his meat and experienced actual happiness. He certainly experienced something other than being attacked because he gave him the meat. But so it says a group of hawks, and we see two hawks at the top. And that's it for this morning. It's already 13 after 8. See if there's some discussion either online. Let's start online because we have very few people here with us.
There is an online question from Charita Devidasi. Krishna Guru Maharaj, as a soul, is it that one has to be attached to something or someone?
Yes.
Can one become totally detached?
No.
Like if one gets detached like Avadhuta, but not get attached to Krishna.
He doesn't describe attached to nothing. No, you have to be attached to something. So something can be the body, something can be the soul, something can be the supreme soul, but you have to be attached to something. It's just a principle. So the answer to your question is no, it's not possible. And the Avadhuta Brahman is not attached to nothing. He's not attached to something temporary. What he's attached to is not identified.
Thank you very much. Next question. So why we have all these discussions about the universe, structure of the universe, population, increase in progeny and such things, when we also know that the whole purpose of Bhagavatam is a complete renunciation of the world and complete attraction to Krishna.
Why is that included in the Bhagavatam is the question?
Yes, why do you have the topics? That's the question.
Well, the Bhagavatam is for everybody. And there are some people that aren't at that stage of abject detachment. That's most people. Very, very, very few people are at the abject detachment position. So that information of involving oneself with the temporary in such a way that it leads to attachment to the eternal is described. Why not have only one ashram? Because their person is not inclined for that one ashram. So what do you do with those people? Toss them out the window? No, we engage them in, according to their inclinations and propensities. And the knowledge of the Bhagavatam includes everything. So it includes the topics that you're asking about. There, and how to involve ourselves or engage ourselves with those propensities in such a way it leads to elevation.
Another question from Zoom. I would like to know how much importance should one give to maintaining the body?
Well, there's two answers. The standard answer that Prabhupada would give is to maintain body and soul together, that much. But what's required to maintain body and soul together? Well, the second is, it depends on your consciousness. And so the second answer is, you do that which will allow you, and it's different for different individuals, allow you to be peaceful. We recognize we're not abjectly detached, like neglect the body and let it get wrecked. We see it as Krishna's property, so we maintain it in that consciousness, but not overdoting and excessively pampering the body and its demands or its needs. So there's a balance of, according to your level of spiritual progress, you cannot be peaceful unless X or something, whatever that something is. That's what you do to remain peaceful, so you can go forward with your progressive Krishna consciousness. Now, the risk with that one principle is, as soon as you establish X, there's this itching sensation that says, I need X plus, or 2X, or 3X. So checking that tendency is important. And so therefore, there's always, whatever your level is, there's always the aspiration to simplify or increase on the spiritual side, and thereby the internal sense of, I'm not peaceful unless it's X plus, it'll reduce naturally. So mode of goodness is living simply. So we aspire to live simply and keep it simple. We aspire to keep it simple. And how simple? So you can be peaceful and carry on your devotional service. That's how much.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. This is from my So I have, my question is about attachment to the devotional service. Should we be detached to the result of it, or when we do devotional services, we are often in anxiety to make it perfect. How much attachment we should have, or could you give some guidance on it?
It's a razor's edge. The razor's edge means we, on the one hand of that razor, we want to do things very nicely. Not obsessively, but we want to do things very nicely. And we make our best effort to do things nicely. And while making our best effort to do things nicely, on the other side of the razor's edge is, we're not the controller of how nicely. We're not the controller of the result. We're meant for Krishna's service, and we have a capacity to render service to Krishna. And we make our sincere best effort. And the opposite side is complacency, and then the other side is obsession and doership and controllership, and that's what this hawk message is teaching. Too much attached. So we're not too much attached. We're conscientiously trying to do our best, and then in that consciousness, then the results are up to Krishna. Not we don't detach, and who cares? So I go on book distribution, who cares? Or I'm chanting my daily japa, who cares? I'm cooking in the kitchen, who cares? So we're not like that. We're not like that. We're detached from the results. Who cares? We make our best effort. And while making our best effort, we try to act in the consciousness that I'm not the doer or the creator of the result, because Krishna says, never think like that. But we serve to our best capacity, always trying to improve whatever our capacity is. And how nicely the service is done, we try, in a reasonable effort, sincere effort, and leave the results up to Krishna, hoping that Krishna will increase my capacity to distribute books or cook nicely or do well in my exam in school or whatever it is that we're involved with. Obsession too much on this side and too little on that side are to be avoided. Okay.
Three questions. I'm going in order. If everyone's time of death is predetermined, then can prayers change it?
I didn't get it. Is the assumption that the time of death is predetermined? Is that built into the question?
It looks like it.
Well, not necessarily that the time of death is predetermined. The time of death is sanctioned, but not predetermined. You can make really dumb choices and end up your time of death happens sooner. Or you can act wisely, and with Krishna's sanction, it can permit your time of death to be a little later than otherwise. So the assumption that the time of death is predetermined is not right on the target. Does that answer the question?
Looks like it.
Okay, go ahead.
The next question from Dharishta Didi.
Slow.
Guru Maharaj, are we indifferent to Krishna because we don't really love him? Is this the correct understanding?
Well, at the mind level, the answer is yes, but at the heart level, the answer is no. In the conditioned state, we've checked out. But at the heart level, it's not that we don't love Krishna. Next.
This is from Manini Radha Didi. Thank you very much, Guru Maharaj. How to avoid the risk of falling into isolation while being situated in detachment of the temporary?
Nice question. This is from China. How to avoid the feeling of loneliness? Is that the word?
How to avoid the risk of falling into isolation?
Falling into isolation. Risk of falling into isolation. Well, make your connections palpable. That is, some persons are persons who you and all of us can more easily feel a connection with and invest in those relationships where you feel some connection with. And the investing in those relationships can be different things at different times, especially during this pandemic era. But one need not feel isolated or be in an isolated position, mindset. If we understand association with sadhus is vital and natural, let me invest in that and however it's best done, given your life circumstance, you go for that. and you won't feel isolated. So it's not that detachment doesn't mean you become a stone or you don't have meaningful things, but it's the temporary things. So let those relationships that are meaningful to you be meaningful on the basis of your loving relationship with Krishna and their loving relationship with Krishna, and you're sharing those experiences, devotional experiences together. Now, the holistic picture is we also have things other than our relationship with Krishna that occupy our attention. So you may engage in discussion with those that are dear to you and close to you and whom you connect well with on things that are, your struggles with the temporary. But the goal of those interactions should remain the same. How can this, which is a struggle for me or you or whatever's going on, how can that help us remember Krishna? That's what a real friend is anyways. You're someone's friend if you remind them of Krishna, and someone is your friend if they remind you of Krishna. And that's the basis of friendship. It can be all kinds of things out there, not just, the eternal pastimes that the soul has with Krishna, and let's go there. It means also including the temporary, but it's not, that is my happiness, is combining the material elements in such a way I get material happiness. Okay?
So one more online question.
Okay.
From Atulya Didi. The birth charts, could you please elaborate on if astrology has any place in life of a devotee?
If what has?
Astrology.
Astrology. Sure. Astrology can tell you these are influences because of past deeds. These are influences acting in your life. It even, puts it in a time frame. During this period of time, this influence, that period of time, that influence. Prabhupada likens it, as you've heard me say many times, it's like the weather forecast. So the meteorologist can tell you that the chance of rain today is 30%. So then, knowing that the chance of rain today is 30%, you can make some choices. And it's not that if you didn't know what the meteorologist said, the chance of rain is going to be different. It's going to be a 30% chance of rain. Or like, one of the other days, it was 100%. It was on a Sunday. It was uncomfortable. It was a Gaur Purnima in Potomac. Anyway, so 100% chance of rain. That made in the course of our life as devotees, we decided we're not going to have an outdoor Gaur Purnima event because it's 100% chance of rain. Although there was a nice idea, it was plan B was, so we made decisions based upon the weather forecast. So astrology can be like that. It can tell you something, but you don't let it rule your life. You still have a Gaur Purnima event. You still do your service to Krishna, but you just take into consideration, you may, if you don't, it's quite okay too. These are influences that may be acting upon you or us or something. It's a factor to consider. It's not determining, policy.
I think the follow-up question, how much can the planetary positions impact a devotee?
How much can it what?
The planetary positions.
Impact? Well, if it's going to rain, you can carry an umbrella or not. You make choices based upon the impact. It is what it is. Influences are what they are, and you're making choices. You have free. That's not taken from you. Your free will choices are always yours, and that's who you are. And then there's the circumstance that you're passing through, and that's not who you are. But you can learn from an understanding of a flow of events. This is likely to happen without looking at an astrology chart. How much to what degree? You know, it's just a possible, not so important factor to consider. That's how Prabhupada trained us.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, so there's one question online. How do we balance others' expectations of us and our capacity to serve?
Well, your business is to please Krishna, and part of pleasing Krishna is you consider what is meaningful to others, but that's not the dial that you set. I have to please others. You'll guaranteed you'll disappoint because it's not who we are. We're not beings meant to please others. We're beings meant to please Krishna, a subset of which is pleasing others. And something we know very well, sometimes we're going to be displeasing to others, and that's just how life is. We try to not do that, but it depends on what's going on. And don't become obsessive about it. They're back to this topic of that Manani Radha asked about isolation. We're not detached from people. While we're trying to be attached to Krishna, we're not detached from people. I don't care kind of detachment. Or the isolation kind of, I'm going to stay away because, there's potential involvement with the material modes of nature and the karma of another person and so on. So I'll be isolated, that kind of extreme detachment. That's not our lifestyle or our instruction. Anyway.
That's all.
Speak slowly and clearly.
I think that's all.
Okay. Okay. We're done. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah.